Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Hope you guys have had some tea and you're good to go. You're no longer feeling very cold this chilly morning. My name is Philip Kisaka. I am a privacy lawyer by profession. Today we are discussing Digital Rights Inclusion Forum 2022. And before we begin, I want us to do an exercise. How many of you are connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi? Just by show of hands. I mean, let's be honest. How many of you have read the privacy policy of the hotel before connecting to the Wi-Fi? Oh, very good. So I want us to do an exercise before in just 1 minute. Just go back to where you have signed up to join into the Wi-Fi, and I want you to go through the policy and see what data you are giving to the restaurant, so and see where it is going to be resident, and see what purposes the restaurant may use that data for in 30 seconds. 30 seconds as I go by. Because we've noticed that as much as we talk about digital rights and inclusion, we, the people who are supposed to exercise our rights, barely know our rights at times. And so, right now there's a policy on how your data is being used and all that. Then you find yourself on some marketing platforms, database and all that, and you ask yourself, where did they get my data? Where did they get my data? Where did they sort of mine this from? And you keep complaining, while in fact you had the opportunity in the first place to decline. I know at times data is expensive if you're using bundles, but we, the citizens, and we, the people, need to be fast to realize that we have rights, and these rights, we need to exercise them within the context of the digital landscape. So today I am joined by my colleague, and I was just telling Akai that it was a great disservice that we didn't manage to put him on the poster. But my colleague, Wilson Mahome, I've worked with him for a number of years. He is a lawyer, and he just told me he's joined some department where he's working now, but he'll introduce himself more. He is a professional in this industry, and I'm also hoping to learn a thing or two from him as we go by before I conclude. So thank you. But let's give him a clap.
Good morning, everyone. So my former boss once sent us to a link to an article, and the article was about how not all lawyers are built for public speaking. I thought that was an interesting article because I was telling Diana and Philip how for a very long time I've had this supreme anxiety when it comes to speaking in front of people. I have been trying to get over my anxiety. So I hope today will be better than the other days. So anyways, you heard my name is Wahome Wilson. We've worked with Kisaka for quite a number of years now. We met at a farm. Don't like the nice tie for you. Yeah. He was a pupil under me at some point. So currently I'd like to describe myself as a technology and intellectual property lawyer, but more specifically focusing on the areas of digital rights, and obviously a few forms of intellectual property, including trademarks and copyright. Currently, I am an associate at Kikera and Bagama Advocates, working in the intellectual property and anti-counterfeit department. So just a brief presentation on today's topic. Hope it will be engaging. Hope you guys will engage me, and I hope it's a learning session for all of us, not just this side, but also for myself. So HTML is with me a bit. I'll just try and run through the slides. So the topic today is, or the theme rather, for this year is towards a digitally inclusive and rights respecting Africa. And more specifically in Kenya, we'll be focusing on the strides that have been made in ICT and what opportunities exist for young people, more specifically, obviously in ICT and in the space of digital rights. So when I was preparing this presentation, I'll obviously make a caveat of errors and omissions exempted. But when I was making this presentation, I stumbled upon a few interesting statistics. That's in the ICT sector. So many of you know, especially I guess the Kenyans who are within this sitting, understand that Kenya is largely considered as a front runner in the ICT department. That's in the African continent, and we've been regarded as such for quite a number of years. And it goes without saying that some of the achievements that we've managed to accomplish over the past few years include M-Pesa. Even before, I don't know which other countries now have adopted the mobile money payment systems, M-Pesa was a sort of front runner in that sort of space. And I guess moving forward, or looking back rather, a good number of countries have adopted that. And so that's just one of the areas where ICT has been good to us. And you also look at the number of ICT startups that are in the country. There are quite a number, and again, that speaks to how well the ICT landscape in the country is doing. Recently, I'm sure you've all seen how there have been these multinational corporations that have set up in the country. That's, I think, Google, Microsoft, along with others that I may not necessarily be aware of. And so they've just gone about setting up in the country, and I think there's been a complaint from a section of people as to how talent is now reserved for the multinational corporations, because it's becoming more and more difficult to compete, especially if you're a developer or if you're an aspiring developer and you want to work for these big organizations. Then you'll understand that Microsoft or Google or any other multinational corporation is the way to go. So those are just some of the ways how Kenya is considered the front runner in terms of in ICT. So I also found another interesting statistic that as at the end of 2020, so the country market value for ICT was about $635 million. This is actually quite a huge number. So computer hardware made up for about 360 million, while software was valued at 174 million. So the difference makes up for other services in the ICT sector. So that could be things like repairs and so on and so forth. So looking at this number, there are not too many countries that can actually put up such figures. And then the year-on-year growth in telecommunications and broadcasting sector, when you look at CAs, that's the Communication Authority's quarterly sector report for Q2, that's 2021 to 2022, the number of mobile subscriptions stood at 65 million. And this is for a country that has an estimated population of about 50 million. So this means that subscription is more than 100%. And then lastly, ICT was estimated to contribute to about 8% of the GDP. I don't have the figures in terms of how much was actually contributed, but this is also quite a significant achievement in terms of the ICT landscape. So very quickly moving on, because as the topic suggests, one of the things that we will be looking at is the legal, regulatory, and policy landscape in the country. And this is just an overview or a snapshot of what the country's ICT landscape looks like. So I've divided this into three, which is the legal or the laws, the regulations, as well as institutions, and then the policy. So on the legal side, obviously the overarching law is the Constitution. So it literally provides for everything and anything, even touching on ICT. Then there's obviously what we refer to as the mother statute in terms of ICT in the country, which is the Kenya Information and Communications Act. Then recently we have the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act, the Access to Information Act, as well as the Data Protection Act. I don't know if there are any others I might have missed out, but please feel free, maybe at the end or as we proceed, just to give your contributions. And then on the regulatory landscape, or rather the institutions, you have the Communication Authority of Kenya. So the Communication Authority, for those of you who may not be aware, was created by the Kenya Information and Communications Act. And this was way back, I think, in 1998, when when Teleposta was split. So it came out, so one of the entities that was created was the Communications Authority of Kenya. And so very, very recently, there was also the National Computer and Cybercrimes Coordination Committee. This was, I think, launched either early this year or late last year. Then there's also the National Communication Secretariat. And again, in looking at the institutions in the ICT landscape of the country, the courts of law are also very, very integral, because if there is any breach or any violation, more often than not, the first port of call that people will go to are the courts of law. So it's also very important to include the courts of law as part of the institutions. Then lastly, I also include the tribunals. So there are so many tribunals that exist in the ICT landscape that I guess many of us may not be aware of. It may sound surprising, but even as an IP lawyer, I just recently found out that there is a copyright tribunal that exists, and the argument that was being fronted, I think I saw this on Twitter or one of the social media platforms, was that many people have expressed, disgruntlement in terms of the fact that a lot of the positions and the copyright tribunal have sort of been a preserve of lawyers, when really the only position that is preserved for lawyers or advocates is the chairman position. So this the abbreviation which is CAMAC is the Communications and Appeals Multimedia Tribunal. So this one is, if for instance you make the CA, which is the Communications Authority, it's a regulator of ICT in the country. If for instance it makes a decision, you feel aggrieved and you want to complain, and you're not necessarily interested in going to a court of law, or to put it more bluntly, the KICA Act, that's the Kenya Information and Communications Act, does not allow you to go to court without having to exhaust the avenue that is the Communications, Appeals, and Multimedia Tribunal. So you also have to first go to that as a court of call. So if you wish to challenge any decision by the CA, then you have to go to CAMAT first. Again, I didn't exhaust all the tribunals under the ICT landscape, because, as I told you, there are some which I may not be aware of myself, but we'll keep engaging. And lastly is the policy landscape. There are lots of policy. I think at some point I've also included Kenya's Digital Economic Blueprint, which is another policy. But what is considered as a sort of front runner or the mother policy in terms of ICT in the country is the ICT policy in Kenya. And so I've just captioned it as updated, because they keep on updating it. I think the first version was sometime in 2006 or thereabouts. And so they've been updating it and making a few amendments, obviously, with time. And I believe the most recent one is, there's a 2020 version, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, this is just a snapshot of what the ICT landscape in the country looks like. So what are some of the strides that have been made in ICT in the country? In four broad categories, there's been government intervention, there have been legal strides, there's been foreign investments, and then there's been tech startups. So under the first subheading, which is government intervention, so I think over the past 10 years, the current government, anyway, which came in about 2013, has actually, I think, tried to do a lot in terms of ICT. So one of the things that is obviously very, very notable is the digitization of services, which is in no small part thanks to eCitizen. So with eCitizen, I think, or I believe today, you can literally get any and every government service that you wish, whether this is obtaining a visa, whether this is paying or conducting a land search. I don't think that is fully integrated or for all counties, but for the most part. So eCitizen, even if you want to get, I believe something like, what do they call it? The one for DCI, good conduct. Yeah, so there's lots of ways that the government has invested in the eCitizen platform. And you'll recall that when it first started, I think it was in and around 2015, there were only a few government departments that were included in the eCitizen portal. But today, that scope has been widely broadened. And so secondly, how the government has also intervened in terms of ICT is on the creation of platforms such as Ajira. I don't know, anybody familiar with Ajira? Anybody who has benefited from Ajira? Doubtful, because Ajira seems like it's It's an aggregation platform. So you basically just go on Ajira, get some information regarding where you can get a job. It doesn't actually provide you jobs, but they tend to, what the government has been trying to do is link employers to employees, or just give you a bit more information on where you can get digital jobs. So I think things like transcription, freelance writing, SEO, which is search engine optimization, that sort of writing. Then the government has also been instrumental in the creation of organizations, and one of the organizations that was recently established is Kenya, which is the Kenya Innovation Agency. So this, I think, was launched. It's not because it was created by the Science, Technology and Innovation Act, and so it was recently created just to sort of push the boundaries for innovation. And I think in last year they had their first Kenya Innovation Week. I think they're also on track to have their second one this year. So in that sort of respect, again, it's something else that the government is doing just to try and promote or push the boundaries of ICT, because if you go to Kenya's website, they have lots of other sort of subdomains where you can then go and look at things like they have the Innovation Academy, where you say, for instance, you want to learn about data protection, you want to learn about digital rights, and anything that is ancillary to ICT. They're also trying to sort of beef up that sort of thing. Then collaboration with the private sector. So I think this is one thing that the government cannot be faulted for. They've also really been trying to sort of partner up with private entities. And I think one of or two of the organizations which I'm aware of, which are partners with the government, is the Technology Service Providers of Kenya, which is TESPOC, as well as Kiktanet. And with Kiktanet, they've been consistently doing the Kenya Internet Governance Forum, and so the government has also been very, very instrumental in just trying to push ICT in that regard. Then compulsory shareholding. So currently, under the ICT policy of 2016, as updated, I think I said it was mentioned, it was updated in 2020. So currently, the government requires locals to have 30% shareholding of any ICT company. So you can't, if you are a startup or if you are a company, and even if you're looking to have foreign investors, you can't warehouse less than 30% for locals. So again, that is just in a bid to encourage locals to also be proactive and to push their involvement in the ICT sector. So those are just a few ways that the government has intervened in the ICT sector. On the legal front, again, this is also sort of ancillary tied to what the government has done, but slightly more separate. So one is the enactment of laws, obviously. Again, the Constitution. Recently, we had the Data Protection Act, the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act, the Access to Information Act. So all these are acts which are again related to ICT and which touch heavily on ICT. And again, this has been a push on the legal front. And suffice to say that all these laws which I have indicated obviously come with subsidiary legislation. And then again, I mentioned the creation of bodies such as the NC4 and the NCS. Again, those are also on the government side. Then on the foreign investment, I think I mentioned one of the strides that has been achieved in the country is the setting up of MNCs. And I think what I needed to mention was that the first 2 points, which is government intervention as well as the legal strides that have been made in the country, have made the last two possible. So because of government intervention and because of all these legal strides that have been made, then things like foreign investment becomes a lot easier, because if you can get, say, a work permit from eCitizen, then it becomes easy for you to invest, say, in a startup. And I think that's the sort of connection that needs to be made in terms of how far we've come in the ICT front. And yeah, as I mentioned lastly, there are lots of startups in the country that are coming up, not just in all industries, but even specifically in the ICT sector. So I've mentioned a few, but I think I left that handy. So you can obviously include others. So on digital inclusion, which again is a sort of headline or most important thing today. Maybe that's just a brief description of what digital inclusion is. And again, I'd like to pose this question to the audience. Do you feel like Kenya is digitally inclusive based on that brief description? Anyone? I have a mic. So based on the description that I've given there, do you feel like Kenya is digitally inclusive, or are we there yet?
It would be an assumption, a very big assumption, to say that we've become digitally inclusive at this point, because starting all the way from the infrastructure side where you have proper policies, proper acts, and proper programs. But if you go to the infrastructure side, for instance, someone like me that comes from a very rural area, I have problems accessing internet to start. So I cannot say I feel that this country is digitally inclusive. And I will also relate to a small happening that a few months ago, where using my small phone, I was streaming an event where police officer was harassing a Kenyan, and you find that the officer became so offended. They snatch away your phone and they demand that you delete the content that you've streamed or produced. So to some extent, we are not, and it's mainly because of the information and the access to proper infrastructure, digital infrastructure across board. Thank you.
Okay.
I think also to add, I would share the same sentiments that I doubt Kenya's digital inclusivity, because even if you think about the right to access information, I feel like it's really frustrated by disinformation that's kind of rampant when it comes to the Kenyan digital environment. We have a lot of political actors, even churches who sponsor disinformation campaigns. So in such a space, it's difficult, to say that people are accessing information. Because obviously the right to access information includes information that is correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lines.
I'd like to disagree with both of them. I think, yes, there are definitely setbacks to digital inclusion in Kenya. However, if we compare Kenya to other African countries, we're definitely digitally inclusive, because Kenya, first of all, has one of the fastest internets, not in Africa, but in the world. Right now, if I go on the internet, I can access any law that I want. I can know what is happening. I can go on YouTube and watch Citizen Live TV, So there are definitely setbacks. We can do better. But I think as we are right now, we are really digitally inclusive.
I
think also follow-up would be for you to tell us, is there a metric against which you are measuring yourselves?
And
Before you answer that, let's get the question.
Just to add on what both the people on basketball and Lee have said, I think two things can be true at the same time. So that's all I have to say.
I think
hi, kids.
Hi. Hi. I think Kenya has made some strides in trying to be digitally inclusive. The one I can point out is Kenya is one of the countries to have regulations on community networks and create the policy frameworks for community networks that allow communities to be more inclusive and set up their own internet.
Is everyone Who has answered that question, Kenya? I think we should also hear from people from other countries, just to hear their perspective. You might be saying we are not digitally inclusive, people experiencing internet shutdowns, not accessing Twitter. Yes.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm also Kenyan, although I've been told I look Rwandan. So I was just going to point out that for me, the metric against which I would measure any form of inclusivity or exclusivity is threefold: literacy, expense, and disability. And on all of those three metrics, I think we fail as a country, because if you're saying digital inclusivity, and yet not everyone is digitally literate. The other thing is expense. The fact that this government introduced VAT on data, the purchase of data. There are people who can now not access the so-called accessible information because of expense. And the last thing I would say is disability. A lot of the things we do now are online with eCitizen, NTSA, etc. Are those websites accessible by persons with disability? They're not. You need someone to assist you to access those services if you are a person living with disability. So for me, on a scale, I would say we are less inclusive than this.
I think she's helped you answer that question on metrics. But let's hear from counterparts from Nigeria. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So I wasn't going to give a specific response, but I just feel that it's always good to contextualize things. So, for example, when you are assessing Kenya relative to each country, because I remember when I was arriving at the airport, the custom guy was telling me, "Oh, Kenya, we are not developed," and I said, "No, you can't say that if you are thinking within the African context. But if you are thinking within the global context, then it's a different conversation." Then that's when you can then look at Kenya and say, okay, maybe Kenya is not where it's supposed to be, or maybe Kenya is not in the secondary way. But as a Nigerian, as an African, when I look at Kenya, I think Kenya is one of the best examples we have around, because there are a lot of positive that has happened in Kenya. But I understand as Kenyans, because you want better and you deserve better, you are probably not impressed by what's on ground. And I think it's a valid, concern, it's a valid thing to talk about, and we need to demand better. And also, we also need to benchmark, our progress against global best standard and not the local champions. But I just want to put it out there that contextually, within the African context, Kenya is one of the best examples we have around.
And I think that settles it. Thank you so much for your contributions. I think I'd like to agree with everyone. And that's because of what the lady has said, that it's actually possible for more than one thing to be true at the same time. I think my good friend from Nigeria has put it aptly that you also have to sort of benchmark ourselves. And the saying is that, what is the saying? That a preacher is never accepted in his homeland. So because we are Kenyans, we'll probably tend to compare ourselves with the rest of the world. I don't know the Americans, the Europes, or whichever other continent. But in the African context, I think we are not there yet, but we're doing a pretty decent job. To my friend who said that he was in sharks and he could not access internet. I don't know what your sentiments would be, but again, when I was looking at the sector statistics report for Q2, that's for Communications Authority, the report at the end or somewhere in the report, it said that Kenya is currently, 4G in the country is currently at 94%. So I don't know how true that is, but I also do share the same sentiments, because there are places where you go in the country and you either have to be fixed in a certain position so that you can access internet, or do a bit of waving before you can actually get internet. So yes. Secondly, or the second thing is on digital rights. So I don't know, when I'm looking at digital rights, or when I was looking at digital rights, some of the descriptions or the definitions that are posited are that digital rights are simply an extension of human rights on the digital space. And I don't know, is that true as well? Digital rights, human rights, because that's also another conversation. Maybe just another brief engagement on what your thoughts are on digital rights vis-a-vis human rights.
Okay, so from my perspective, it's an easy yes. We're just, I don't know, the only reason why we even need to classify digital rights differently is perhaps because of the attitude of states towards the internet, because they kind of have the power to sort of enforce some of these rights, and a lot of them don't recognize rights on the internet, hence the distinction. But in my opinion, there shouldn't even be a distinction in the first place. It's just human rights.
Okay, maybe one more comment. Yes, please.
In my opinion, digital rights are human rights, because when you're talking digital rights, it's the same things that we talk about when you're talking about human rights. For example, privacy, access to information, etc. And also humans are the users of digital platforms. So it's important to just classify the digital rights as human rights. So yes, it's an easy yes for me as well.
Okay, thank you. And yes, I also feel like digital rights are simply an extension of, and the application obviously of human rights. So whatever rights you'd have, say, in the physical realm, those rights should not be curtailed even as you're using the digital space. And as she's rightly put it, a few good examples of digital rights include, or categories rather, as I've stated, data protection and privacy, intellectual property, freedom of expression, and information, freedom to access, or the right to access information and communication. So very quickly, so what is the Kenyan legal institution and policy framework vis-a-vis digital rights? So again, I've just done a quick rundown of what the Kenyan landscape looks like in terms of the legal, the institutional, and the policy frameworks. So I've very, very quickly listed the rights. So these are what you probably consider categories of digital rights, say expressed or reduced in their legal format. So recently we have the enactment of the Data Protection Act. Then for a very long time, Kenya has had a number of intellectual property acts, which include the Trademark Act, the Copyright Act, as well as the Industrial Property Act. Then there's obviously the Constitution, which again is sort of the mother legislation, which gives rise to all of these ones, again, including the Access to Information Act, the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act. So that's just the sort of legal landscape that exists in the country. On the institutional side, again, going back to what I said in the previous slide, we do have various institutions that are tasked with protecting digital rights, which again include the Communications Authority of Kenya, which is the sort of licensee and grants permission to all these entities, to provide you with internet, whether it's ISPs, whether it's mobile network operators. Those companies have to again be licensed by the Communications Authority of Kenya. The course of law, as I said, that is typically for most people anyway, the first port of call whenever digital rights are violated. But the one thing I would like people to note about the courts of law is that just like in many other jurisdictions, they're also very, very susceptible to being misused. And we've seen this with how the government arbitrarily arrests activists on the premise of, they're spreading misinformation, and all those things. So courts of law, again, they should be used well, but they're also susceptible to being misused. Then there's the ICT authority, which is ICTA. There are tribunals that we have in the country, the National Communications Secretariat. Again, I'd also did mention the NC4. Then on the policy side, again, as I mentioned, we have the ICT policy, which is, again, mother policy in the country, as well as the country's digital economic blueprint. So lastly, I think just to finalize on what are the opportunities that exist or that have been created for young people in ICT. And these are, again, ancillary to digital rights. So one of the digital rights that we mentioned is intellectual property. So because of intellectual property, because of the existence of intellectual property, then individuals or young people are able to become authors, able to become musicians, and and creatives without fear of having their works either stolen or misappropriated. Then startups. So because again of how the Kenyan ICT landscape looks like, it becomes easy for startups to flourish and to thrive. Even on the career side of it, there are a number of careers that have come up because of ICT, which again are people such as myself and Pisaka, calling themselves tech lawyers and data privacy specialists. So again, that's another sort of angle of ICT. And lastly, governance, on how ICT has really sort of made it easier and simpler for governments to exist, for governments to relay information. And in turn, what this means is that people can participate more in government and government decisions, because we know one of the criteria that is required before any law or any legislation is passed is public participation. So previously, what happened was that it used to require physical participation. So you literally either have to go to wherever either there's a town hall or any other organization that you need to go to so that you can give your submissions or to make those submissions. But today it's very easy. If there is public participation that's required on a certain piece of legislation or statute, then government entities will put it either on Twitter or on Facebook and invite comments. So you just write up your comments or submissions and submit it via email. So these are some of the ways which ICT I think has really shaped the country. And yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth, on that session. I know the program is Philip Kisaka, but I think she's done a better job. So let's give him another round of applause. And now we invite questions. Any questions in the next 5 minutes?
Or comments? Any additions? Going once?
So just as a follow-up, I mean, the other day we've seen one of the biggest coalitions in the country right now, as using a soundtrack or music from one of the also largest male band in Kenya, Sauti Sol. And we had, first of all, we had Ezekiel Mutua, who's the chairperson, was it the CEO for the copyright board, right?
Chairperson.
The chairperson, yeah. Giving a different
CEO.
Oh, yeah, the CEO. Whichever. Giving a different opinion on whether the use of that soundtrack by Azimio was in good light. And then we also had, is it Kikobo, giving another different advisory opinion. And you see this overlaps in advisories also creating a problem. Because when we talk about digital rights, we tend to forget the most basic digital rights in terms of, let's say, our artists. Our artists have a right, the copyright to their performances, to their music. And so I have a question, because there's a very big and very fiery conversation on Twitter on whether Sauti Sol are being petty or they actually indeed deserve some recognition and some remuneration on that front. So I'll be targeting tables that have not spoken. The question is, was Sauti Sol being petty? And why did we as Kenyans on Twitter decide to sort of chastise them and criticize them and call them petty for just demanding what their basic right is? Anyone take that?
Hello, I will answer your question and ask another question because you're going once, twice, went really fast. I don't think Sanchez were being petty. I think they're the first example of creative and music band that actually very, very aware of what their copyright, of what copyrights are in Kenya, of what trademarks are, of what anything intellectual property is. And I think they derived that from being a big enough band to travel throughout the world and see experiences with other people. Because you know that, for example, let's take an example of Beyonce's performance during the Global Citizen, I think it was like 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I'm not sure. If you were watching it while it was being streamed on YouTube, you could only watch the concert to a specific extent. And that's because to that specific extent, that's the copyright that was paid for. That's all we could do. That's all Global Citizen was given permission to do. The rest of the concert, the rest of the music on there, they didn't have copyright to be able to transmit that kind of music that she was giving at the type of concert. So I think they are very right. It's not, and also it's not that Kenyans are being petty. It kind of gives you an idea of the lack of awareness when it comes to intellectual property in Kenya and the extent to which people can actually use their music. So I think Soul is owed, they're owed their money, they're owed their business that people didn't know, and people still don't know that this is actually under copyright law. And yeah, it's covered. So I think it's just a very huge lack and gap of knowledge on intellectual property rights, especially copyright law. Yeah, so my question to the presenter who did a really good job was, do you think it's time for Kenya, I know we have a lot of legislation and regulation of a lot of things, but do you think it's time that Kenya is at a place where it starts considering a standalone legislation for digital rights? Because right now, when we talk of digital rights, specifically in Kenya, in terms of policy, we are talking about it deriving from different kinds of legislation that are already existing. So it's always inferred, it's never something that you can say is standard, it's always inferred from other legislation. And when you infer it in that way, you say some other constitutions, the Data Protection Act. But sometimes you'll find that if you're speaking to lay people, maybe they might find it very difficult to correlate to those specific acts with what digital rights actually mean and stand for, especially if they're not aware of the definition of what digital rights is. So do you think it's time for us to start sitting down and considering actual standalone legislation for digital rights in Kenya? Thank you.
Take that.
Very good question, but my honest answer would be no. I feel like there's an overabundance of regulation in the country. And yes, you do make a fair point when you say that they are a bit scattered, and so it becomes difficult for you to pin any one digital right on any one legislation. But I feel like Kenyans have this problem of literally not reading, but and not reading the laws, not understanding the law. Because I feel like if you undertook a proper review or reading of whichever act or whichever statute, then you would understand all your rights under that particular statute. But I also do blame the government because I feel like, and I don't know whether there have been efforts to translate the statute that exists, because obviously there's quite a number of people who do not understand English as the laws, and sometimes they do tend to feel like they are a bit legalistic. So maybe just simplifying it. But in terms of going to the extent of creating a specific act for digital rights, I don't think it would be necessary at this stage.
Thank you very much. That was, I think, all from us. Hope we're not locking anyone out. This time, I would like to honorably return the program to MC of the day. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting, just following the whole legal and policy framework for Kenya. And I think we've kind of touched on digital rights as well as digital inclusion to put everything in perspective in terms of the normative standards. So most appreciated. And I think we can clap hands again for the presenter. I think you did mention I'm not so sure you're going to do a good job today, and I think you did a great job today. So just acknowledging that. I will invite Khadija to come for the next session, which is a panel discussion on digital inclusion perspectives from Africa. Khadija, are you close by? And I will invite, I don't know who dropped off the chair. I think we've got a panel coming up of about 4 people. So it would be great if we can have the extra chairs come forward first. Over to you, Khadija. You can come forward and introduce your panel.
Okay.
Then can you just assist, I think, with the extra chairs just coming forward?
Stuff.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning again.
Morning.
Okay. Good morning. So many people are on their laptops, phones. Please give me your attention. I'm hoping that this is going to be, well, this is going to be a very interactive session. So I'm hoping it will spur some emotions in you and you would contribute. So please pay attention. It promises to be a very interesting panel. We're still talking about digital inclusion, but we're hoping to get perspectives from all around Africa. But before I jump the gun, I realized I did not introduce myself. My name is Khadija Usman. I work with Paradigm Initiative, and I will now be introducing the panelists for this session. Apologies in advance, some of these names are new to me. So maybe after I introduce you, introduce yourself as well, so that I take correction. Okay, so our first panelist would be Yusra Joini from Tunisia. Sorry about the name. Please give her a round of applause. We have Tosin Abolaji from Nigeria. Another round of applause. We have Charles Kajoloweka. I'm so sorry, from Malawi. And Victor Ndede, who I would assume will be our host for this event, for this panel, since you're Kenyan. Welcome to our panel. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us. So we're talking about digital inclusion in Africa. I had a whole speech planned about what digital inclusion is, blah, blah, blah. But the first presenter gave us a wonderful overview of what digital inclusion looks like, especially in Kenya. So I will just briefly say that digital inclusion, which I'm sure everybody knows already, includes the activities that are necessary to ensure equitable access to and the use of information and communication technologies for participation in social and economic life. This includes education, social services, health, and community participation. So access to ICTs can be directly linked to economic and social growth for an individual and a nation. So we've come to a point as a world where if you don't have access to ICT, it can directly impact how successful you can be. Can anyone say for a fact that you can have a good education without access to the internet. Can you? No? Yeah. And this was not the case as early as, say, the year 2000. We could wing it and just go to the library, but not anymore. So I will start with you, Victor. Please, as the mic comes to you, please introduce yourself again, just so that we get to know you better. Yeah? Okay. So should we jump right into it, or we want to go for the round of introductions? For the names that were murdered in particular.
Our name was not murdered. Was dead.
A little bit. Yes. You want to count some, but it's yourself, not yourself. No, usually in the Arab language, it's yourself, but yeah, mine is yourself. Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'll start with you, Victor. What does access look like in Kenya, and what sort of access is important to Kenyans? I know that we gave the technical overview here. We analyzed the laws and stuff like that. But some of us want to know what the practical examples look like on the ground, beyond what the laws say, beyond, you know, the Data Protection Act and stuff like that. What does it actually look like?
Great, thanks for that. So when you look at access to ICTs here in Kenya, one of the things we have, and many thanks to the previous presenters on really giving us a lay of the land in terms of what that looks from a policy perspective, and now Khadijah's question on what really is the practice, or what really is, as Kenyans like saying, on the ground. One of the first things we have to look at, and I'll approach this question in terms of what the barriers are actually in Kenya in terms of course, access to the internet. And the first one is we have a challenge with our network infrastructure and our infrastructure policy. So one of the things we do note, and I think someone alluded to earlier speaking, is that we have the Communications Authority saying that up to 80 to 90% of the country is covered in 4G network. Which, to be very honest, 4G is only, you only realize 4G quality or 4G internet access within major urban towns. And so this is the first barrier to access, because most of the time, if you leave major urban towns and go into the rural areas, your connectivity drops to, at best, 3G, and most cases, you're at 2G connectivity. Which means with most of the things that we want to access with 2G connectivity, you can't really access it. Government has, of course, made a lot of commitments towards the improvement of network infrastructure, and it will also bring me to the second point in terms of the money they're actually getting from mobile service operators in terms of the universal fund, which is supposed to actually support the improvement of internet access across the country. But as we all know, as many Kenyans would know here, is that we have suffered a lot of challenges with the Universal Service Fund. I'm not sure that now, as I've not checked as recent, but I'm not sure it is actually operational at this moment in time. But then this money has still been going, because I think they charge, 2% on the revenue of all mobile service operators in terms of their annual turnovers to this fund, which is supposed to build or supposed to improve infrastructure for internet access or for mobile access in Kenya. So this is not happening. And so one of the other things I look at, because the hat I wear here is, I work for a human rights organization, and now we look at what this actually means towards realization of these digital rights that we were speaking about. In the case, say for example, and the pandemic presented a very interesting opportunity for us here in Kenya. And I'll use the schools example. Just because of internet access, we were not, the government's ambitious plan to migrate our education to the online platform was not realized. Why? Because of a key problem, which was the network infrastructure that we do have to support education. And if if you look at that as a right point, is that the right to education, of course, for those people who could not get access to the internet, stalled. To quickly move to the second point, that point, great for the count. There's the issue, of course, that has also been alluded to here, which is in the regions of taxation. So we have recently the digital services tax. Incrementally, we have seen increases in excess duty charged on purchase of mobile data, mobile, the internet, and all the subscriptions that we have incrementally increased because government has been keen on, of course, their short-term fiscal projections in terms of raising money. But if you look at this in terms of the longer term, what it actually means is that we are getting to a point where many people actually, I always say many people in Kenya are actually offline until they get to a Wi-Fi zone, because it boils down to a conversation: should I buy X basic need or should I buy mobile data, which is increasingly expensive? And so if you look at that here in this country, I think now we're at 20% excess duty on this mobile data, telecom, the call tokens and all that. And this seems to be on an increase. And taxation not only looks at the service, but also looks at the product. And so we look at what taxation is levied against most of these mobile products, so the mobile phones, tablets, computers, and that equally is a cost to look at in terms of inclusivity here in Kenya, because as much as we tend to say that there is availability of cheaper smartphones, are these cheaper smartphones also affording people equal access to this internet that we talk about? We have a cheap smartphone that you'd spend 2 hours loading a page that someone else loads in a minute or a second. So there's that there's that critical aspect of the taxation. And as you know, the government of Kenya and our Kenya Revenue Authority, but I'll just say the government is always keen on increasing its tax base. And digital has always appeared to be the easiest and quickest way to increase the money because of the usage of these digital services, the usage of these digital products. And this, of course, presents an inclusion issue. If you look at other statistics, I can't quite remember the reports, but if you look at where many communities are actually faced with the option of still remaining on feature phones. And so they're excluded from this smartphone technology, and as such also excluded from a lot of the rights they do enjoy from accessing the internet. The other thing I would mention, so that I stop.
I was about to say, I've been so carried away with you that I forgot that there's a time limit.
Sorry. There's a less talked about issue, which for me is usually on the content available on the digital platforms, which is an inclusion issue. If you look at the majority of content we interact with, is usually what I'll just say, it's international content. And what we push for people to really appreciate the devices and the internet space for us is local content. And I'm sure you've had some government agencies push for more local content on our televisions, I think largely from Communications Authority to a lot of the television broadcasters on what is our local content percentage vis-a-vis our foreign content percentage. And the reason why content is important is because we find scenarios where a lot of the information we have is in, say, English. English is, of course, not a first language in this country. And as such, it means that a lot of people are not able to really understand what is in this internet space. And so we have seen a couple of organizations. I think in Kenya, we now have advancements towards having a lot of our local languages available on the internet space. There's an exciting project by, I think, called Ken Corpus, which is funded by GIZ in terms of trying to get a lot of these local languages on the internet. Mozilla is having another one on Swahili and trying to get this. And the reason why this is important is because outside the urban centers where people actually interact a lot in English, if you get to the rural areas, someone will tell you that a lot of the things on this smartphone, I can't understand. And so
you may pass your information on that platform, but your communication to them is not inclusive because it's in a language that is not their first language, so you don't expect the understanding to be at that
Okay,
level.
Victor, I'd have to.
I'll stop at that.
Okay, so thank you so much, Victor. You addressed penetration, you addressed affordability and what has suffered because of it, and the need for local content. So I'll just plug in my organization here by saying that every report we produce, we translate to Swahili proudly. Okay, so going back to the session, what does it look like for you in other regions? What does access look like? So starting with you, yeah. So I would have to tell you to keep it short and not go on.
Well, thank you so much. Once again, my name is Charles Kadoreka. I'm a human rights activist from Malawi and a partner of PIN. I work for an organization called Youth and Society, and we've collaborated with PIN in a number of interventions. Yeah, during tea break, there's a comrade that on that table, and had to check with me that whether in Malawi it's true that we don't have internet at all. And I protested instantly, said, oh, that's not true. But now, having listened to the conversation here and looking at the progress program that Kenya has made, I'm beginning to be convinced that perhaps we don't have internet at all. Yeah, so in terms of the government obligation around, ensuring that every citizen has access to the ICT, the 2016 Communications Act, obligates the Malawi Regulatory Authority, MACRA, to ensure that every citizen has access to ICT services. So basically, it is the government obligation under the law to ensure that every citizen has access to ICT services, the internet, and as well as other mobile services. I try to the current situation when it comes to access. So we are around 20 million people in Malawi. And that is very, very important because the next statistics again should be measured against that population. But when it comes to access to internet, as I speak this morning, it's around 14.6% of the country. And I can begin to compare again with your countries. So 14.6% of the 20 million. So largely we have a population that is offline. And even those that are online, in terms of access to internet, even if internet is not really reliable. Yeah. In terms of even the smartphones, out of that population, 20 million, is only 300,000 Malawians that have at least smartphones that have access to the internet. So look at 300,000 versus the 20 million that we're talking about. So that speaks to the digital exclusion that is there. And if you look at the 14.6% that I'm talking about, how that's access to internet, largely it is urban based. So you're also looking at the digital divide between the urban and the rural. When you bring the gender aspect as well, it's the women largely that are left behind when you look at the statistics. And I'm not very, very sure if I even talk about persons with disabilities. So the exclusion is really violent. For me, it's violent exclusion in the digital age that we need to address. Even we're talking about internet and other things, but let's just talk about coverage. Just the network, for you to have access to a telephone network, is only 71%. So we have about 4.1 million Malawians who are not connected to telecommunication of any sort. So this is where we are, and when it comes to some of the drivers of this digital exclusion, You are looking at taxation as a major issue in the country. So you talk about the excess, duty. You talk about every text message is taxed. So all these toxic taxes that at the end of the day are heaped on the citizens. Number two is again the duomonopoly in the telecommunication industry. So you're going to have two telecommunication companies in Malawi, Airtel and TNM. And because of the lack of the competition on the market, basically these are institutions that have monopolized the market. And it has been very difficult, even to break this duomonopoly. And it has even been very difficult for government to negotiate to have even better services. So these are some of the areas that we need to highlight. Let me also highlight that while we're talking about the access, the other issue is about the threats online. So you already have got limited access to internet, only 14.6, but even this 14.6 is also targeted. There's a growing crackdown. If you go on the Freedom House 2021 report on the internet freedom, Malawi had declined from I think it declined by a point. And the Freedom House has been very clear that decline is due to the arrest of individuals for expressing themselves online. So for the last 18 months, since the new political administration took over in Malawi, you are aware we changed government in Malawi. It has arrested over 16 individuals, 4 of them for insulting the president. All right, allegedly assaulting the president, but basically using the defamation and sedition laws, the cybersecurity laws. Women, young men have been arrested for expressing themselves online. And that is really, threatening, even not just the access, but even it is bringing in issues of self-censorship. There's another issue of, surveillance, where people have been arrested after government has intercepted their private conversations. And all these put together, threaten not just the access, but also even how people can use those facilities when they're online. Let me stop there for now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So, I think a clear gap that I can see that is shared between Kenya and Malawi is where there's access. There seems to be a rural versus urban area issue going on. So I would love to hear if that is something that you can relate to yourself. But I think if anybody is tweeting about this, right, you need to quote Charles where he said the exclusion is violent. That was very compelling for me. But so let us know, how does it look like in Tunisia? Is this something that you can relate to?
Definitely I can. But also that's one thing you have to love about Africa is that it's so diverse, and as much as in one panel you have different narratives, different stories, there are the common challenges, but also common opportunities. So yes, in Tunisia, rural versus, let's say the connectivity issue can have some regional aspect to it. So just for context, Tunisia is still a very centralized country, and when I speak about being centralized, it's not just the capital, it's also on the coastline. So when it comes to that, yes, even in numbers, we can see that there is connectivity gap between certain areas of the country. But that's not all the story, because even in central cities, you have major gaps between certain areas. So just one common story I heard from a friend who actually works in the cultural expression. And one of her projects was about cultural expression in certain popular areas in the capital. And when COVID happened, well, their target audience did live in the capital city, did have supposedly certain privileges compared to other regions, but still they didn't have enough internet access. So that tells the story that no, it's not just about one region and the other, it's also in the same region, there are so many
differences. And sometimes that's something that we need to check when we look into numbers. At some point in my life, I was a math major. So my second nature is to go and see numbers and see what do they tell. And in Tunisia, if you try to find updates between 1 year and the other, well, updates are not huge usually. We are in the 90% when it comes to the 4G and 3G coverage. In the country now, they are testing the 5G. When it comes to internet penetration rates, etc., we speak about internet users around a little bit less than 8 million. In Tunisia, we are a population of around 12 million, so 8 compared to 12. When it comes to mobile penetration, which is also common with African countries, we have 150% mobile penetration. So you say, oh, the numbers are good. They're not bad. There's some progress that could be made. Well, but one thing, when you're a math major at some point in your life, you know that numbers have certain limits. So, but also numbers that tell different stories. So if you go back a little bit and say, okay, this is the number of internet subscriptions in the country. But let's say when it comes to households, how many households per 100, let's say, inhabitants have access or have what they need to access internet. And then you find that almost 50% of households don't have access to the internet. And that translates again on how are you using the internet access. So if we speak about education, for instance, the Ministry of Education, but also UNICEF, I'd like, now that we are a bit relaxing on the COVID measures, etc., they went and say, actually, one of the gaps in e-learning in Tunisia was that 50% of households and students were not able to access any educational platforms because one, they didn't have enough equipment, and maybe they couldn't also have a stable internet connection. So it's also about the quality of the internet. Its costs, Tunisia is usually affordable, but still the cost plays a huge factor when you are trying to get a full education online. So that's some points that I wanted to address, but just another point is, to whom is it inclusive? So if we are start speaking about the rural areas, etc., and the differences, but also when it comes to the gender gap, but also when it comes to people with disabilities. Just like many other African countries, Tunisia could be applauded for how many conventions we are signed and ratified it. But again, what are you doing with those instruments? So on the one hand, it's not only about having, for instance, when it comes to e-government services, it's not only about to have those services, but how are they being translated and communicated to people, for people with disabilities. As someone with a visual impairment myself, I always like to translate the offline and the online. So let's say we are in a space that has stairs. It's very good to have the, the difference of color sometimes, because of course disability is a whole spectrum. You need sometimes to understand that, to know the challenges we face is that, okay, it's nice to have in the stairs to have different colors when to know that which step are you in. But the second thing is also that we also need sometimes tools to use it. So I use a certain tool myself to navigate, to know when there is a high, there is a down, etc., and how to navigate the space. And that's also could be translated online. So as government, but also as businesses, it's very important to have accessibility by design in your digital tools and digital platforms you propose for people. But let's also speak about accessing tools that are for people with disabilities when you are coming from a country, for instance, where the dinar, which is the currency of Tunisia, is non-convertible, and you don't have applications or enough applications that are good enough for people with disabilities to have access to, that could be bought or even available for them for free by the normal citizen or the person with disability. And also here comes the language barrier. If you don't have it in Arabic and French, probably most people with disabilities won't be able to access it. Now that's the case in Tunisia, but if you look in Algeria and Morocco, if you don't have it in Amazigh as well, or Berber, which is one of the first languages spoken in North Africa, is that maybe also you are excluding other people. So yeah, just wanted to maybe have the touch on different points and to see what is actually, what do we know about accessibility and inclusion, but also how is it used, and also to whom is it inclusive?
Yeah.
I love that you ended with a few questions just to get our minds thinking about to whom is it inclusive, you know, and I would come back to ask that question. So for everyone else, have your minds thinking. But initially, when you started talking about how the numbers in Tunisia might look good, but you know, it's not that great, it reminded me of the first session when those of us who were Nigerians on the table were thinking, wow, you guys have all this. And how it's you know, we always would want better for ourselves, and we're not there yet. We're not there yet. So to you, Tosin, tell us about Nigeria.
Thank you so much, Tubekile. I'm glad that I'm on this session, and I was thinking, I love the fact that I'm beginning to hear from other countries and see how everybody is expressing themselves, and you know, making us understand how it is. A few days back, I was in South Sudan, and I could hear some of the participants. We had this, we had DRIF in South Sudan as well, and I could hear a lot of participants telling us that Nigeria is one of their dream country. They would like to visit Nigeria, like, seriously? Yeah, because I could relate to what they were saying, based on the fact that there's a whole lot of things that we as Nigerians think that, or what they think that we enjoy and they don't enjoy. Like, you know what? Maybe, you know, there's this quote that says that Oliver Twist, we do what? We ask for more. And I don't think we are there yet. We keep asking for more. And the countries like South Sudan keep telling us that, no, you guys are there, like you guys are there. Like, you know what, don't worry. By the time you come to Nigeria, you get to understand. I could relate with what everyone is saying, and especially Charles, right? Yeah, and one of the things we've done as an organization, I think one of the things that we really speak about today is talking about the things that we've done as an organization. Fine, definitely there's a lot of issues around there. And from experience, I've got to understand that there's a whole lot of issues that I could relate with across board in terms of there's a lot of issues that is similar across board in the continent. But fine, I think it's more of we concentrating on Kenya today. Let's understand, because we had this conversation in Nigeria, because we have a deep session in Nigeria as well. And I'm here to, when Charles was explaining a lot of this, I'm like, wow, that's interesting. I think we are there yet, but there's a whole lot that still needs to be unfolded. Yeah, one of the things we've done as an organization is understand the fact that I, as a person, I'm very passionate about the unconnected population, which has to do with the rural part of everywhere that we have. And when he was talking about the local contents, that's one of the things that we've been able to do as an organization, to understand that it's not everybody that understands how to deliver these contents in English. It's not every community that could relate with what we are doing in terms of delivering these contents in English. And due to the research that we've done in the past, due to our experience and all that, we've been able to create contents. I mean local contents that these young people, especially these unconnected populations, could relate with. Because as an organization, one of our major goals is to see how we can connect as many African young people to the internet and make them understand the benefits, the importance of what they could tap from when they are connected to the internet. It's not about us, it's not about what we think, it's about what the problem is, and look for the possible, the immediate solution, and see how we could do that. Sometimes in 2020, we got into Kenya. No, we got into Senegal. And one of the communities that we established our office in, we got to find out that English wasn't the language. It was one-off. And that was a question for us to say that, you know what, it's how do we deliver this content how do we deliver this local content so that these young people or this unconnected population can relate with what we are talking about. And it looked difficult at some point, but we've been able to do that. Right now in Senegal, we've been able to deliver our trainings, our interventions in local language. And a whole lot of young people have been able to connect to that. And that's the way forward for us. It doesn't have to be in English. So it was easy for me to just connect with what Charles was talking about. And yeah, so for Nigeria from the experience we've been able to gather from the research that we've done, one of the major problems I think that we've been able to tackle and we are still working on is awareness. A lot of these young people, a lot of this unconnected population are not even aware of the benefits. What does it even take to be connected to the internet? When I'm connected to the internet, what are the things that I can even do? How can I even improve my livelihood and all that? And we've been able to do that in terms of, I think the first stage for us is let's create that awareness. They need to even understand what it means to even be connected to the internet. Yeah, majority of this population, they tend to tell you that, when I'm connected to the internet, what else? I don't think the internet is the priority for me as it is right now. But we'll try as much as possible as an organization to make them understand that, connecting to the internet, making them understand the importance of being connected and understand what ICT is. There's a whole lot of opportunities that will come after them. And as an organization, that's something that we'll be able to do. I don't want to talk too much in terms of, I want to really learn from, it's more of Kenya now. It's not just a Nigeria thing. We've had the Nigeria session, but let's.
But still hold on to the mic.
So I have one question for everyone here, and you'd have to answer in one word or two. What demographic suffers access the most in your country? What demographic? So say, I know you sort of had mentioned people with disabilities, you have mentioned women. What demographic suffers lack of access the most? One or two words. We're wrapping it, people.
Does that understand for me?
Yes.
So I think
one word.
Okay, one word. Women.
That's it. Okay.
Towards people in interior regions.
That sounded like three.
Yeah. Exclude the people.
The poor. Rural youth.
Rural youth. Okay. Awesome. And we can see from the panel, my mic keeps dying. I'm hoping you can hear my voice without it. If anyone is available to assist me with that, that'd be great. Okay. So Yusuf had mentioned how there are opportunities here. And since, we're coming to the close of the panel, based on my time, let's talk about opportunities, solutions, interventions. And we're not talking in abstract here. The most realistic solutions that you think would come up for the problems you have mentioned in this room, and particularly interventions that you think the people in this room can participate in. Yeah.
But you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Do I need to repeat myself? They heard me.
For the live stream.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I was saying that now we need to talk about solutions and interventions, but not in abstract, but in action. What can we do, especially the demographic in this room? And we would start with you, Mr. Kenya.
Such a heavy represent the country, but I believe equal to the task. So quick interventions. For me, the first goes back to the awareness conversation. And awareness can be fed into by all stakeholders who would ordinarily be represented in this room. There's a role to play from government. There's a role to be played by us in civil society. There's a role to be played by the development partners we have, and is equally a role to be played by the citizens. As with many other conversations, I have always believed that in the absence of awareness, we'll keep going back to the same circles of what needs to be done, because we may be sort of preaching to the choir here, but this information is not with the people who would really be benefited by this info. And by this, I mean, if we're talking about how do we increase inclusion, or how do we push for inclusion in the digital spaces? I believe the people we have in one word or two words say they're not included should really be the center of this conversation. And so that they guide on what they feel should be how they are included on these platforms or included in this conversation. So it can never be sort of a purely government-led initiative, a civil society-led initiative, development partner-led initiative, but it can be an initiative that is led ideally with the citizens at the center. And so one of the things, of course, to split them into quick threes, is government has a role to play in terms of awareness on digital inclusion. Most of our governments have rolled out e-government services. They've rolled out, we're now in this digital identity craze. But we do realize that little investment has gone into making people aware of what really is the benefit of this either digital identity system or this e-governance platform is all about. It has just been, let's roll it out, people will join in at the point they want to join, or join in compulsively. So, and that has created resistance, because now you see people resist these platforms, people are not included on these platforms, people are not aware on these platforms, and that is the sole reason why we keep going back in the circles of we are not including a group of people, yet we have not invested enough to get these people on board from the onset. And you could go to the live examples of Kenya's Huduma Number project. One, it was sneaked in through a miscellaneous amendment to our laws. Those things where it's one amendment in a couple of 200 amendments that they usually have. So you can't spot it unless you are really, really looking for it. Comes the year when it started, they started the rollout. You're just hearing, we're registering for a new digital identity. Nobody has told you why this new identity is coming, what was the problem with the previous one, what are we seeking to achieve. All that information is not there. You're just told to register by this day. If not, you'll be deported. And you know, it was a serious threat given that this country has deported a citizen. So you look at that abrasive nature of how a digital project was rolled out. It was not inclusive at all. It didn't look at populations that were previously marginalized and suffered with the previous identity system, for this example. It did not bring them at the center of that conversation. Of course, the other thing goes to our civil society. I think we have a role to play in terms of the awareness gap. We need to stand in the gap between what governments, where government stops and where the citizens are, and stand in the gap in that awareness sort of space of for those legal lacuna. Yeah, because if we don't invest in using our power as civil society organizations to bridge this awareness gap, then for me, we'll still be going back to government saying you didn't do this, and yet we still also act as agents of the people. Civil society organizations are meant to serve the people. And so we have a clear role to play, of course not the government's role to play, but a clear role to play as civil society organizations, that most of our work should really be outward facing. Most of our work should be with the people we want to be included, as opposed to meeting again or meeting regularly a civil society organization, talking about people who are out there. And so most of this investment should be going to these people, getting their thoughts on inclusion. And because we stand in the gap and we have ears to government agencies, stakeholders, and policy leaders and makers, we stand in the gap for them. I think lastly would be, we really need to push the advocacy equally to the internet's ICT providers. I believe they equally have a role to play, and when pushed enough, they equally meet the inclusion targets. So say, for example, if we are talking about a local content as a barrier to digital inclusion, and we have our major ICT providers perpetuating exclusion by keeping all communication in English. They know that a majority of our population or a bulk of our rural population do not use English, even Swahili as their first or second languages, and still push content out, especially content that relates to their usership of that platform or ICT, then we are clearly supporting them to exclude these massive populations. And so I believe advocacy should also be targeted towards the ICT providers. I believe we bring them to rooms, and as I've let me just finish with that.
So I'm letting Victor own the mic since we're in this country. If they can deport citizens, then who are the rest of us?
Apologies, my volume is not a representation of Kenyans, so I pass it on.
But you made so many fantastic points about awareness and responsibility we have as civil society, being the gap, like you said, between the government and the people. We should try not to exclude the people that we keep mentioning. We do have a tendency to work in silos as civil society, but I like to believe that we also have access to the people and we take these messages as far as we can. So talk to us, Charles.
Right, thank you so much.
Solutions, opportunities, interventions.
Right, for me, I think the first opportunity is the growing interest of governments in investing digital rights or in ICT. For them, it's not just about rights of citizens, it's also about the economy. It's about service delivery. So for me, that growing interest and realization of governments to invest in ICT is an opportunity in itself. For example, in Malawi, the recent World Bank Economic Monitor report shows that Malawi is losing about 189 million US dollars every year in GDP because of the deficits in terms of investment in ICT infrastructure. So already government is attracted, to these statistics that if we invest more, then we're going to sort of increase our GDP. So they may not very much be motivated by the citizens' digital rights, but again, most importantly, is that they're looking at this as an economic opportunity. So for me, that is number one. Number two is that I've already seen, like in Malawi, the government has developed the digital economy strategy to demonstrate its commitment to facilitating these fundamental rights, again, and investment in agriculture, in the banking sector and so forth. So those are, areas that I can highlight when it comes to opportunities. Number two is that we have a vibrant civil society in most African countries. In Malawi, I can mention that. But again, maybe the issue is how we do make sure that the civil society on the African continent is also more into the digital rights issues. Because much as we're talking about, civil society advancing the agenda around digital rights, but there are very few. And in some countries, digital rights issues are really just emerging. And how do we make sure that there's more engagement, there's more inclusive civil society movement building around digital rights? And I think the existence of civil society already is an opportunity. The third point I want to raise is the question of addressing poverty and inequality. Is a major driver of exclusion. Even if internet is available to everyone, like the accessibility, but how many will really afford to get a smartphone? In my country, where you have 51% of the population that lives below poverty line, and 25% of that population living in extreme poverty, the question is that you have to decide between your next meal and your next bundle. All right. So addressing the question of poverty is a big one. And I think our government and all of us must really, move in to address the question of poverty and as well as growing inequalities. Today, inequalities, the inequality question is a big one. And I think to all countries, in Malawi, the geo-coefficient, as I'm speaking now, is around 0.6, which is really one of the highest, right? Now, how do we address those? Because if you address poverty, you address inequality questions, then you're also increasing, access, because people, will have moved, towards better space to access these facilities. So the poverty and inequality question is a big one in terms of facilitating these fundamental rights. The fourth one is to also ensure that we challenge some of these draconian laws that really limit access to ICT or access to fundamental digital rights. So if you look at the cybersecurity laws that have been used in the name of national security, you're talking about defamation laws, sedition laws, all these laws must go. And how do we do that? We must really unite to push back against these draconian laws so that we create a conducive environment so that as the online army continues to grow, borrowing from Benga, we also make sure that we create a conducive environment for their participation. The last one.
I might need to speak.
Thank you so much. I will talk about business and human rights and the importance of the business to participate in protection of digital rights, including the data protection. Thank you.
I see what you did there. Something I'd like us to answer in the room when this panel is done, whether indeed Malawi does have access to the internet. So Yusuf, you brought us here. So you tell us, what are your thoughts and opportunities?
When you asked actually about opportunities and looking at the multi-stakeholder approach, let's say, I thought what to choose. There are so many opportunities. And sometimes a blank space can feel intimidating in a way. What can we do in we have so many opportunities, there is so many emptiness and space to innovate and push things forward, but where to start, etc. But no, actually blank space can also be potential, huge potential. Now what's hindering that potential and what obstacles we have? If we were all government or public officials in here, I would be left the bureaucracy in Tunisia. Please, let people innovate, let them, businesses, but also civil society, even in the public department, sometimes they have obstacles to innovate and to actually provide digital platforms and digital solutions. But at the same time, it's not the full story again. On the one hand, yes, you have the bureaucracy that's hindering that, but also you have the communication. Sometimes it's the lack of communication. Sometimes they do a good job in that. And when I say communication, it's when you do something good, please tell people that they can use it. Because at the end of the day, what's the purpose of proposing certain solutions if you don't communicate effectively and you don't educate people on how to use that? And you need also to trust patterns. So when I was listening to you speaking about Malawi, and sometimes it's about the cost and how challenging is that. I remember in the early 2000s in Tunisia, one huge problem to accessibility was buying a mobile device, but also buy a mobile subscription, because it was one company, a monopoly public company, and you need to be on a waiting list and you need to pay so much money. And the moment they lifted that ban, it was also about putting it in policy, but also the communication of actually now you are allowed to initiate, to innovate in that sector, to telecom operators. Now we have way more operators and they have sort of competition. So the costs are lower. Of course, there are also challenges because sometimes, there is competition problems, or when it comes to, are they really being competitive, or they put in, Anyways, so yeah, sometimes you need to trust the patterns. When you have a policy that's hindering accessibility or put a monopoly in certain sector, well, you can't actually expect another result. You don't do the same mistake and expect something else. But sometimes also you need to trust the patterns when it comes to, if you want to initiate people to use platforms, maybe start by building trust as well. So just to give one practical example and end with it. So in Tunisia, like in the last, let's say, 2021, there were two main platforms that were launched by the government. So it's pretty much similar, but had different results. So the first platform was EVAX, which was a vaccination portal for registration and it has so many challenges, like it's not perfect at all. But at the same time, there were an effort to actually tell people about it, communicate, because it was pretty much the only one. They had like offline places where you can do it, but still it's the better choice to do it online, etc. And there were so many like communication reports, like on TV, online, they made the effort. And they communicated as well about the challenges about it. They communicated about the data privacy. They communicated about like if they are using your information in certain in other areas, how you can access it. For people with disabilities, how they can access it. If you don't have internet connection, how actually you go to certain place where it's super near you and you can also do the registration, they will do the registration for you. So that's one good example. With all its flaws, it's still a good example. And vaccination, when it became available, it became also accessible for people through that platforms to get appointments there. Now, a second example that was not so good was, of course, people in power now would disagree with me, but it is something called national consultation. So after a power grab in Tunisia, etc., by the president, he was like, okay, we are doing a national consultation. We are using open government in a way, but not so many people got registered or even took that national consultation. They would argue that their numbers are high, and no, we saw that even in their own room or in your own family, you ask who actually accessed that platform, and not so many people would say yes. Why is that? One, the context and the ecosystem was that we don't really trust what they are doing with our information. The second one was, okay, you didn't respect certain freedoms of mine, so why should I expect you to respect my information or my opinions in a way when I give them to you? So you see two examples. One is, I would say, success compared to the other one, but still launched by the same institutions in a way, but still it's all about the communication and building the trust to do that. And just to end is that I once heard someone saying that the best time to fix the roof before the rain is to start when it's not raining. Yeah. And sometimes we have to be reminded of that. We don't need another COVID pandemic to be reminded that we have a potential when it comes to the digital age. And yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, that was a well-deserved round.
we understand the fact that a whole lot of young women and girls have been excluded, and we just don't want to follow what we have in the book, but let's put that into practice. These are one of the issues that we have from the interventions that we have in Nigeria and beyond. And we try as much as possible to ensure that a whole lot of staff, team members are female. And that alone says a whole lot to the interventions that we have out there. I think by the time you have a heart-to-heart talk, in terms of girl-to-girl, women-to-women talk, it is a whole lot. And that has really helped us as an organization in terms of, looking at the culture and where we are coming from. A lot of people feel that ICT, getting connected to the internet, is just a boy thing. It's not something that the ladies or the girls should be engaged with. But for the fact that the staff, the people talking to you are women, and they will tell you the importance, they will tell you how the internet, how ICT has helped their life and all that. I think that alone is a strategy for us as an organization to ensure that we continue to close that gap, that gender gap that exists in the digital space.
Okay, thank you, Tosin. Sorry,
I have to be excused. I started talking.
I'm very passionate. I'm very passionate about this. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this.
No,
I have to say, please,
absolutely.
just 2 minutes, please. I have a 4-year-old daughter. I was very intentional. I wanted my first child to be.
So you might have to tell us that type of intentionality.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Yeah. So just to say that really in Nigeria, when we're talking about excluded groups, women are up there. I think a statistic from somewhere, can't remember right now. Women are 25% less likely to have access to the internet. So it's something that we try to be very intentional about in our interventions in that country. I forgot to mention how you also mentioned the need for communications, and making those interventions known. And we don't take communications and putting out our message, making sure that everyone knows of the message, the interventions, they're not taken as seriously. It's why every time I pick the mic, I try to plug my organization in there because, communications. So we have 6 more minutes. If there is any contribution from the audience, now is the time. Fantastic. 1, 2, 3. So we can go 2 minutes each, not a second more, please. Thank you.
Okay.
The benefit of sitting in front. Okay, so my own contribution is just, you asked the question earlier about what are solutions, what are way forward and stuff like that. I think from a macro level, what I think is very important is that I personally am waiting for the day an African government to declare internet access as a public infrastructure, not just by mouth in terms of action. The same way we look at electricity and water, and we prioritize them as basic things that people should have, everybody should have access to. Even when we are not, when some governments are not able to provide these things 100%, the fact that they are termed public infrastructure has made it necessary for a lot of attention to go into that direction. I think that as far as internet access is concerned, in the world that we live in today, that thing should be public infrastructure. It should never be something about who can afford and who cannot afford it. Everybody should simply have access to the internet. And I also think that digital literacy should also be prioritized in academic curriculums, in public and private school. It shouldn't be optional. If you go to a lot of schools, they are more like optional courses, for some people. I also think it's very important that is prioritized so that at every level of education, whether at the primary level or at the secondary level, even before the tertiary level, every single child should be given, digital literacy training so that they are able to engage in the digital world, because that's the reality that we live in right now. So I'll keep it brief as you have asked. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
I'll be straight to the point. I am a believer in local people, local problems, and local solutions. We cannot just be pushing the blame to other entities. And in my case, some of the initiatives we're doing is we're trying to get the local people to use the internet and appreciate that their own languages and identities are as unique and as important as possible. Thank you.
Did I mention all our reports are in Swahili?
Thank you so much. I'll also try and be brief, keep it to 1.5 minutes.
Okay.
I'll also be plugging one of the services that we provide through this solution. I think one of the most important things is collaboration. And we have so many lawyers in the room. And with the different country perspectives, there's a lot to learn from each other. And one of the things we offer is pro bono legal services for NGOs. So anyone who is in the civil society space, as well as social enterprises, can join our network and get pro bono legal services. And the point I was trying to make is about the importance of legal research in this space, to try and have a comparative analysis, to have a document with best practices from all the different regions. We can all learn from each other, and we all want to go forward in this space. So if you represent social enterprises or NGOs, please speak to me over lunch or elsewhere. Yes, we'll be happy to support with your pro bono legal needs.
I think we're all coming.
Booking an appointment, yeah.
For us already.
I think Nena had her hand. We have 2 more minutes.
I'll keep it brief. I might be kicking myself later when I have to give my closing remarks. Maybe I should have saved this. But I wanted to contribute to the question on interventions. I think Boye really spoke to the high level solutions that we're looking at. And I think there is general consensus on what needs to be done. But the issue is the vehicle of how we get there. And I think we need to listen more. One thing I've learned from DRIF22 2022, going through 15 countries now, is that it's so important to listen to the affected communities and the populations and to involve them in whatever we are doing. Like Victor said, this is not a CSO-led or government-led. It can be a government-led plan or a CSO-led plan, but a multi-sectoral collaboration. I will maybe coin and say human-led, because this should be a human concern. Like Boye has just said as well, the internet is no longer a luxury. It is a basic social necessity now in society. So just to wrap it all up, I think listening is very important to the affected populations and a multi-sectoral approach to whatever interventions that we have. And also that listening gives us contextual information, because I think Joshua mentioned earlier about figures. Figures tell a story, but they don't tell a story without background information. There's no nuance, there's no information on the actual reality of the people in this community. So I think there's a cross-section of stakeholders here. And we said quick intervention, but I don't think quick fix is the answer, because we'll forever be plastering a wound. We need to be in the long game. What is the end goal? Like Boye said, internet should be public infrastructure, and at the same time, there should be policies to ensure that our rights also are, upheld and respected. Thanks.
Yeah, I have a dream that one day. Okay, so we have finally come to the end of this panel. We have stretched it by a minute. But I want to say thank you to our panelists for being here, most of which were impromptu. So thank you for bringing your base knowledge and just sharing with us. And I'm hoping that this panel has inspired everyone here to make changes and take on certain interventions in your own spaces of influence. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the camera is still on its way now.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
One more.
Is that it? Thank you.
Can I clap for them once again? Thank you so much. I think that was a very interesting panel. It took us back to the real issues, the nuts and bolts of our mere existence. It took us back to our communities to reflect on what the challenges are. And clearly there's a lot of work. And I think we have found our space. We see how we can locate ourselves in the conversations or in the solutions. And yeah, I think we can definitely continue to advocate for digital rights and digital inclusion. So thank you so much, Khadija, and the great panelists for doing a great job. All right, I think now, remember our theme is towards a digitally inclusive and rights respect in Africa. We also want to respect your right to food. So at this point, I will ask us to take time out and go for lunch. And then please don't go away. You never know what can happen if you, stay long enough to the last minute. So please come back at 2. We've got another interesting session coming up. We won't be long. I think you've seen on the program, and I think we are right on time. So it's one of those programs that is really sticking to time. So let's be here on time at 2. Bon appetit. And one other thing, sorry, before we go, if I can have everyone's attention, please. So, hello. We have a request. I think you'll find in your emails an evaluation form. Hello, everyone. Hi, the last table, just 2 minutes of your time. So we are going to send an evaluation form in your inbox, your email inbox. Please kindly take about 3 minutes to just complete that before you leave today. We would really appreciate it if you take the time. You will help us to improve going forward in the future. Feel free to share with us what you think of today's program. And yeah, enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.